In April 1912, the Titanic began its maiden voyage from Southampton to New York. It was the largest moving object ever built by man, a 269-meter-long vessel that cost the equivalent of $400 million today. For the media and public, it represented the absolute peak of modern luxury and industrial power. At the helm was Senior Captain Edward John Smith. At 62 years old, Smith was the White Star Line's most experienced commander, handpicked to lead this high-profile crossing. The ship's safety relied on two engineering choices. First, a double-bottom hull with an inner steel layer kept the vessel dry if punctured. Second, 16 watertight compartments. Builders calculated the Titanic could stay afloat even if 4 sections completely flooded. These features gave White Star Line executives the confidence to go before the public and make a specific historical guarantee that the ship was, quite literally, unsinkable. They believed the engineering had finally made maritime disaster a thing of the past. On the night of April 14th, that confidence met a harsh reality. The Atlantic was freezing, the moon was dark, and visibility was extremely low. Despite receiving 7 separate ice warnings from nearby ships, the crew maintained a speed of 21.5 knots, nearly 40 kilometers per hour. This speed was a result of corporate pressure. Joseph Bruce Ismay, the chairman of the White Star Line, wanted to prove that the Titanic was the fastest ship in the world. When Captain Smith received a warning about ice fields ahead, Ismay reportedly kept the information quiet to ensure the ship didn't slow down. At 11:39 p.m., lookout Frederick Fleet finally spotted an iceberg directly in the ship's path. He rang the alarm, but the reaction on the bridge was a disaster. In the sudden panic, steersman Robert Hitchens misunderstood the order and turned the wheel the wrong way, steering the ship directly toward the collision. At 11:40 p.m., the impact occurred. The iceberg was roughly the size of a football field and weighed an estimated 1.5 million tons. When that mass collided with the moving ship, the momentum was enough to deform the steel plates instantly. Because the ship turned, it took a grazing impact along its side, bypassing the double-bottom hull. The iceberg tore holes across 6 watertight compartments, surpassing the limit of 4. The Titanic was mathematically destined to sink. The safety features were effectively neutralized. A combination of corporate deadlines and a high-speed steering error had turned the unsinkable ship into a wreck in less than a minute. Captain Smith ordered an immediate distress call, but the closest responding ship, the RMS Carpathia, was 107 kilometers away. Even at its absolute top speed, the Carpathia was 3.5 hours from the site. However, another ship was much closer. The SS Californian was idling just 37 kilometers away, close enough for lights to be visible on the horizon. But because it was late, the Californian's radio operator had switched off his equipment for the night, leaving the ship deaf to the Titanic's SOS. The Titanic's crew began firing emergency flares into the sky. The Californian's crew saw these rockets and informed their captain, Stanley Lord. But Captain Lord dismissed them, assuming the wealthy passengers on the Titanic were simply setting off fireworks for a party. As the deck began to tilt, the true cost of the unsinkable myth became clear. The Titanic only carried 20 lifeboats, enough for barely half of the people on board. The company had decided that more boats were unnecessary and would only clutter the view for the first-class passengers. The evacuation was chaotic. Many passengers, still believing the ship was safe, refused to board the boats. The very first lifeboat to be lowered had a capacity of 65 people, but it left the ship with only 28 seats filled. By 2:05 a.m., the final lifeboats were lowered into the dark. The iceberg had breached the hull, but the vacuum of emergency protocols and the shortage of boats ensured that over 1,000 people were left with no way to survive. At 2:20 a.m., the ship snapped in two and sank. Of the 1,500 people left in the water, most died within minutes from hypothermia in the -2°C ocean. Captain Smith stayed at the wheel until the end, disappearing with his ship. When the news reached land, the global shock was immediate. Investigations proved that the disaster was a systemic failure involving the ship's owners, the captain, and the neighboring ships that failed to respond. This tragedy changed the maritime industry forever. It led to the creation of the International Ice Patrol and the signing of the Solace Treaty, which still mandates today that every ship must carry enough lifeboats for every person on board. The wreck itself remained a mystery for 73 years, until it was finally discovered in 1985. Ocean explorer Robert Ballard found the ship 3.8 kilometers deep, resting in 2 separate pieces on the ocean floor. Today, the Titanic is slowly dissolving. Deep-sea bacteria are eating the metal, and experts believe the wreckage will completely disintegrate by 2030. Even so, the fascination remains, with billionaires still attempting to fund replica projects to recreate the voyage. The Titanic serves as a permanent lesson in history. It shows that no amount of wealth or engineering can protect us from the consequences of our own arrogance.